Before wrapping this tutorial up, I wanted to mention some features of the Color Management tab that may help you to test some quick looks for your freshly created lighting setup. There are a few potential tweaks there that can have a dramatic effect on the contrast ratio and other fundamentals of lighting, such as the exposure slider, for example, the amount of light that goes through the lens. Make sure to experiment with it to gauge how your lighting setup works under different exposures. Okay, then I usually switch off the UI elements while testing, like that. Okay, another pivotal control is the type of look or the contrast base level. By default, it is using medium contrast, even if it says none. Tinker around with the higher or lower contrast bases to see your shot in a different light, no pun intended. It is like changing the contrast ratios globally, as opposed to going into the light settings for each lamp and tinkering around it from there. Okay, my intended base look for this setup is exposure -2 and medium contrast base though. I quite like how it looked. One more sweeping adjustment worth mentioning is built-in RGB curves applied on View Transform. Not only can it be used for the tonal adjustment, giving it the S-shaped curve for higher contrast, for example, and so on, but also it can be used to curve the tonal response of individual channels, red, green, and blue channels, for more sophisticated grading. Or, in other words, to slap a quick and dirty look there, even before moving on to post-processing. Like how it would look like if there was less greens in the shadows and a higher amount of green tones in the highlights, without going crazy, of course. How would it affect the vibe of what we have just set up? The same for the blue channel. I use it to kind of challenge my lighting setup from the perspective of broad image-making changes, if that makes sense, as it's always interesting what overtones it would generate in different exposures and so on. Will it hold up? Will it change the vibe radically? That's kind of interesting. Finally, I'm giving it a proper render, and now it should be a good time to congratulate ourselves. You're doing great. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about cinematic lighting and show some interesting things. The only thing left, I think, is to give a quick summary of steps that we have taken to build this pretty versatile character lighting setup.